Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, man, Preet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. Obviously, we got the Contender series in full swing, and that's probably where you'll be able to find the Fight Archive to be most useful, so you know what to expect every Tuesday night with these fighters that the UFC is trying to showcase and who should end up coming on top, or if there are some sneaky underdogs you're able to uncover by utilizing the MMA Fight Archive. We got direct links to past fights, so pretty much all these fighters competing not just for the Contender series, but stretching over 17 different promotions from all over the world, which is why we have over 4,200 and counting fighter profiles available for you guys to check out just this weekend alone. It is a busy week in the MMA world. We got Aries FC 24, A1 Combat 24, Cage Warriors 176, OKTAGON 60, Bellator San Diego, the UFC Vegas card, as well as ACA 179 on Sunday. So make sure you guys take full advantage of it. There is a 7-day free trial for you to try it out for free. So give that a whirl and you can see what all the hoopla is about. You can see why there's over 90 current subscribers, ranging from coaches, fighters, analysts, predictors, handicappers. If you enjoy studying up on fights and breaking them down, this is a much worthy service for you to invest in. But again, 7-day free trial. Try it out for free. All right, this weekend we got UFC returning to action here. We got UFC Vegas 97 on tap, headlined by a welterweight matchup between former title challenger Gilbert Burns taking on rising star Sean Brady, who comes in with a 16-1 record. The only loss coming to current champion Belal Muhammad. So maybe people will throw a little bit more respect to Brady, considering how far Muhammad has managed to take this current run that he's on and dethroning the champion like he did back in July. Co-main event features a very intriguing battle. Let me just quickly remind myself what it is because I forgot it off the top of my head. Jessica Andrade versus Natalia Silva. So just like the main event, it's kind of a passing of the torch type of fight. Will the veterans be able to hold on to their spots, or will the up-and-comers take their spots and get that much close to a title shot? All right, let's just quickly let's do the quick recap for the MMA lock of the night play that we had for the last UFC card, which actually was Nathan Fletcher. That ends up being a push due to an illness that he suffered from on fight day. So we don't end up cashing on a lock of the night play, nor do we end up crashing on a lock of the night play. But we did have some regional action that we had some spots on. So we do end up increasing our lock of the night record on the year to 62-30 for a 67% hit rate. In terms of the dog of the night, came through with flying colors as we had Kong Wang under 1.5 at plus 160. Cash for us, I believe, in less than 30 seconds, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even less than 60 seconds. And we had a couple more dogs on the regional scene. That now brings our dog of the night record to 31-64 for a 33% hit rate. We're finally on the right track in terms of getting back closer to the profit for dog of the night plays. But again, still far from the goal that I would like to have. Quick plug for the MMALOTN Patreon page. We got a ton of content dropping this week because of the vast amount of MMA events we actually have. OKTAGON 60 and Cage Warriors 176 go down Saturday morning specifically, and I'll have written breakdowns on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. You guys can check that for the link in the description below. But there's also a Bellator card going down, which I will have a video breakdown for you guys on YouTube probably by Thursday evening. So stay tuned for that. But if you want action to the appetizer for the UFC card in the form of OKTAGON and Cage Warriors, you can find that strictly on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Check the link in the description below for that. And then lastly, shout out to Godzilla Wins, providing your boy a platform to drop written breakdowns on a weekly basis for you guys. On Thursdays, we drop the main event breakdown. And then on Fridays, we drop the 3 best moneyline spots. So take full advantage of that. It's free for you guys. GodzillaWins.com. The NFL season is kicking off right now as well. We got a great team of writers and analysts over there covering that sport. So if you want to tread into other sports as well, those guys over there will have you covered in terms of that. So check that out, GodzillaWins.com. All right, that's a wrap on the plugs. We got 12 fights to break down. There was a 13th fight added to the card right before I hit record here, so I will drop a separate breakdown video for that once the odds are out and have started to, settle, rather than just playing these openers that most people like to jump in on. But Matt Schnell was originally scheduled to fight Alessandro Costa. Costa was forced to pull out a few days ago, and in steps Cody Durden, taking the fight on Tuesday of fight week. The fight will be contested at 135 pounds. Normally these guys compete down at 125, but Durden saves the day, jumps in on short notice here, and we'll see what the odds end up being. But I will break it down for you guys in its own video, probably on Wednesday afternoon/evening. So keep your eyes peeled for that. So first fight of the night is actually going to go down in the featherweight division, and it is a matchup that I had a lot of action on 2 weeks ago, but ended up having to get it pushed to this card. It is a featherweight matchup between tough veterans Zigomantis Ramaska coming in at plus 120, going up against Nathan Fletcher, who comes in at minus 140 in this featherweight matchup. Now, if you guys remember, these two were scheduled for the last UFC event, but an illness on fight day pushed this fight to this card. Hopefully that's enough time for Fletcher to recover from whatever bug that he did have and still go out there and perform to the best of his abilities. Now, when it was fight day and right when the odds closed, I believe he closed closer to minus 170, or at least he started the week off at minus 170. Action coming in on Ramaska, and that's roughly where this line ended up, around minus 140 for Fletcher. Ramaska was actually on the supposed to be fighting Myron Santos in the semifinal on The Ultimate Fighter. Unfortunately, his matchup against Bekzad Usmanov was an absolute war, and Ramaska was not able to get cleared to compete in the semifinal bout. But luckily, the UFC did the right thing and gave him an opportunity to still compete in the UFC and try to make a case for himself. He is a solid striker with a lot of stinging power, and I think the flaw in his game is his takedown defense and his ability to deal with guys that are very good in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu realm. He's active off of his back at times and has done a good job in terms of stuffing takedowns against certain opponents, but I think he was very lucky in the Usmanov fight that Usmanov was at a size disadvantage and was unable to overcome the striking advantage that Ramaska had in that matchup. Ramaska is fun. He's a great fighter, but I do have my concerns about his grappling game, which is why I really like Nathan Fletcher in this spot. Fletcher lost his first fight on The Ultimate Fighter to Con Offley, who ended up losing in the finale to Myron Santos 2 weeks ago. But that was a matchup that Fletcher apparently injured his leg in, I believe, in the first round. Still had some solid success in the third round, but unfortunately came up short on the scorecards and ended up losing a 2-round decision. His lone defeat as a professional came to Dominic Whitting in a matchup that he was pretty much dominating for about 2.5 rounds with his grappling until he gassed out and allowed Dominic Whitting to finish him. Since then, he's bounced back with 2 straight victories over some tough competition, even finishing his last opponent by submission. He trains alongside Paddy Pimblett and those guys, and I believe that is a big reason as to why the UFC has decided to match Ramaska up with Fletcher, is to give Fletcher that opportunity to still compete in the UFC, even though he came up short in his first tough matchup. Again, I believe Fletcher's grappling will end up being too much here for Ramaska, and I actually had Fletcher as a lock than I played, like I stated earlier, last week or 2 weeks ago in this matchup, but I have my reservations in regards to what that illness was and if he has actually made the recovery in this 2-week span to be 100% in this matchup. I'm still going to pick him to win. I still think that minus 140 line is not too bad. I'm not going to go as heavy as I did last time around, but I do think we'll see him eventually get this fight to the ground, and I think we could still see him pull off a submission here within a round and a half. Next up, middleweights going at it, as we got Andrade Petroski coming in at minus 265, going up against Dylan Budka, who comes in at minus 225. We'll start off on the Petroski side, who was able to pick up a very dominant decision victory over Josh Fremd not too long ago. I believe that fight was back in May, and that was a fight where he was able to just drag Fremd to the ground and control it for over 13 minutes in that 15-minute matchup. It was very impressive to see him only have to utilize 4 takedown attempts, completing 3 of them, and then getting to his game in terms of just keeping his opponent on his back and dominating him from that top position. Petroski is a guy that I've said in the past has some cardio issues, but it seems like when he can dictate the pace and get his wrestling going, he does a good enough job in terms of sucking wind on top so that he can go out there and go 15 minutes if he needs to. He has a very dangerous submission game, and he has some big power in his shots, but it's really his ability to grind opponents with that wrestling and grappling background that makes him so successful and so dangerous. I think he's very very happy to start distancing himself from that unfortunate loss that he suffered at the hands of Jacob Malkoun in a matchup where he ended up knocking himself out from the hip of Malkoun when he went for a takedown attempt. That was a fight that he started off pretty strong and winning the first round, I believe, on all three judges' scorecards, and then that unfortunate circumstance happened with him getting knocked out there. I believe Petroski is still a very dangerous middleweight, especially depending on the type of opponent he's going up against. And I think he has the very favorable matchups, as the odds indicate here, against Dylan Budka, who's just a little bit too much of a bully with his size more than he is a technical fighter. We saw him come up short in his UFC debut against Cesar Almeida, where he won the first round on all three scorecards, but was unable to inflict enough damage to really wear on Almeida. In the second round, we saw Budka get back to his takedown attempts, but Almeida did a great job in terms of working back to his feet and keeping Budka working. And then I believe probably around the first or second minute mark of that second round, we saw Budka visibly slowing down, sucking for wind, and Almeida was able to eventually pound him out and get him out of there. Budka on the regional scene has been able to use that physicality to overpower his opponents, take them to the ground and grind them out, or at least find finishes from the top position. But when he faces legitimate competition, he ends up coming up short. I believe this year's version of Wes Schultz will likely get the better of Dylan Budka should they rematch. But I don't think Budka is that great. I just think he's just he's more of a bully with his size than anything, and that's only going to get him so far in the UFC. I like Petroski a lot in this spot. I think he could even pull off a submission in here. I think he's a far superior BJJ specialist and a far superior wrestler. Budka needs a Hail Mary KO if he hopes to end up getting the win here, but I do think Petroski will dictate the pace and win this matchup pretty easily. All right, next up, we got women's strawweights going at it here, as we have Jacqueline Amorim coming in at minus 300, going up against Vanessa Demopoulos, who comes in at plus 250. Starting off on the Amorim side, she is now on a 2-fight winning streak after dropping her UFC debut to Sam Hughes. That was a matchup where she was unable to sustain her grapple-heavy approach, slowing down drastically in the second and third rounds, allowing Sam Hughes to outdamage her and win that fight on the scorecards. Following that, Amorim was able to utilize and dictate the pace against Montserrat Conejo, and that was a fight that she was able to conserve her energy, or at least manage her gas tank well enough going into the third round to eventually get that TKO finish. And then the Corey McKenna fight, we saw Randa Marco-esque decision-making from Corey McKenna to play in the guard of Amorim, and Amorim was able to snatch up that armbar within a minute and a half. She's a high-level BJJ black belt, but unfortunately for her, her wrestling is not that much there. That's why we often see her pulling guard and looking for reversals or submissions off of her back, and that's where she ends up being very dangerous with her jiu-jitsu. It's just the wrestling that she needs to continue working on if she hopes to be successful at in the the rankings for the strawweights. She is on a 2-fight winning streak. That confidence is probably starting to gain some steam after that unfortunate UFC debut. But she's got a tough veteran here that she's facing in Vanessa Demopoulos, who finds herself on a 2-fight winning streak, but also 4-1 over her last 5 fights. Now, it's funny because the last 2 fights for Demopoulos, a lot of people do not believe she ended up or should have deserved the decisions those nights. According to MMA decisions, out of the 29 scorecards submitted for both of Demopoulos' last 2 fights, only 3 scorecards were in her favor. In the Kanako Marotte fight, apparently the judges were weighing the damage that Demopoulos was able to get off for her back more than what Marotte was doing from that top position. And then in the Ducati fight, it seemed like she was throwing with a little bit more aggression. She had some good moments, but it seemed to me that overall Ducati was getting the better of the exchanges, even though she wasn't getting as much of a reaction as Demopoulos was getting from Ducati. So that probably played into the judges' eyes as well. Demopoulos is a BJJ black belt who often looked to take opponents to the ground and try to grind them out from that position, but she is becoming more confident in the striking game, which is why you see her biting down on her mouthpiece a little bit more and throwing with a little bit more conviction. I think just the optics of her throwing with the power that she is and being explosive and utilizing her athleticism the way that she does makes her a little bit more convincing in the judges' eyes, but I just don't know how much longer this Cinderella story is going to continue. She's 35 years old. Yes, she's athletic. She's getting better in terms of the striking game. And she's doing things that are clearly winning on the judges' scorecards. So that's something that we need to respect. It's tough for me to get behind Jacqueline Amorim here at minus 300. Even though I do think she wins this matchup, Demopoulos has never been finished as a professional fighter, and that even includes with no submission losses either. Amorim will likely be the best BJJ specialist she's faced to date, but I think we'll see Demopoulos do a good enough job in terms of stopping the submissions. The question is, can she stop the takedowns, which is a big question mark here. I believe I do have this written here. So Demopoulos has stuffed 3 of 9 takedown attempts through her 7 professional UFC fights. But her second last opponent, Kanako Marotte, who comes from a wrestling background, was 5 of 6 on her takedown attempts, meaning the other 6 opponents only combined 1 of 3 on takedowns. And that 1 takedown came from JJ Aldrich, who fights at a higher weight class and was a much bigger fighter than Demopoulos going into that matchup. If Demopoulos can keep this fight in the striking realm, things get very interesting, and that minus 250 does not look too bad. It's just hard for me to trust Demopoulos because I don't think she's that great. But if Amorim can't get this fight to the ground, things will be very, very shaky for her. So for me, this fight is more of a pass, maybe considering the over 2.5 around that minus 200 line. Again, Demopoulos often goes to decisions. She's hard to put away, and she is not the greatest finisher either. And then on the Amorim side, I think that this is a fight that she ends up grinding out more than anything. Maybe her jiu-jitsu is good enough to catch Demopoulos in something. So I'll go with Amorim by submission as my favorite prop here, but with the lowest of confidence. It's very hard for me to get behind Amorim here. And I might, monitor this Demopoulos line throughout fight week and see if it gets any better, or even that Demopoulos by decision line, maybe even Demopoulos by split decision, and try to take a little bit of advantage of that just because of the optics. Judges apparently like what she does in the cage, and that might be enough for her to pull off the upset here. But in terms of a legitimate prediction, I'm gonna go with Amorim and Amorim by submission. All right, featherweights throwing down here in what should be a potential fight of the night banger. We got Yizha coming in at plus 230, going up against Gabriel Santos, who comes in at minus 270. On the Yizha side of things, he's riding a 3-fight winning streak, but none more important than his last victory over Kaiwen Lee, a submission armbar, I believe that was, that he picked up in that matchup. But that was a road to UFC finale matchup that he was finally able to secure his UFC contract with. He did make it to the finale in the prior season, but ended up coming up short against the Korean Tiger Jung Lee in a split decision loss, which is a very, very close fight. Yi often relies on a relentless wrestling approach, looking to drown his opponents on the mat, but we are seeing some improvements in his striking game, putting pressure on his opponents. He does leave some openings in terms of being countered, but he tries to utilize the pressure and aggression to make up for the shortcomings that he has in the technical striking. But if he had it his way, he'd be looking to take opponents to the ground and grind them out from that top position, or at least trying to look for submission opportunities. He's very strong in that position, and he could get some wins on the UFC level, but it depends on the level of opponent he's going up against. This weekend, he's going up against Gabriel Santos, who is currently 0-2 in the UFC, but I believe he is much better than that indicates. He is I believe he was the former LFA champion, or at least won the featherweight Grand Prix that the LFA was putting on, as he did manage to finish that tournament off with a beautiful finish over former champion Jose Delano, where he finished him with a beautiful shot to the body. But he let me down big time against David Onama. He had a very solid start to the first round. I believe all 3 judges scored that round in his favor. And then in the second round, he was having some trouble in terms of holding Onama down, getting the shots off that he wanted. And he ended up eating a big elbow and then eventually a big uppercut that put him out clean in that matchup. Onama, we know, is a heavy hitter, but I really thought that Santos would be able to continue pressuring David Onama, drown him in deep water, and potentially finish him late, but that big shot was just too much for Santos to handle. Initially, I thought Santos gassed himself out, Hence why Onama was able to get that big finish the way that he did. But I do think it was more so the damage that Santos was eating, especially in that last few exchanges, that ended up kind of deflating his wheels and allowing Onama to get that knockout victory. Santos is still very skilled, and I think he's the better mixed martial artist here against Yizha. But that pressure and aggression of the Chinese fighter could make things a little bit interesting here. Santos is susceptible to being taken down, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Yizha enjoy some top 10 here. But I think the aggressive BJJ approach of Santos off of his back will allow him to either throw up submissions or find reversals and get-ups to get this fight back into the striking realm, where he could end up being the slicker striker. What I do like more than the Santos money line, which is obviously chalky at -270, is the under 2.5 at plus money. Considering how both these guys fight, they are coming to throw down. Both guys normally like to push the pace and stay in their opponent's face, which kind of makes me believe there's going to be a lot of car crashes in this matchup. Even if we do see a lot of grappling exchanges between the two, I think that both guys are active enough in those situations with their scrambles and submission attempts that we could potentially see one of these guys actually come away with a submission or at least a TKO. So my favorite spot in this matchup would be the under 2.5 at plus money. I do think that Santos will end up being a little bit too slick and more technical than Yizha, but it would not surprise me at all if Yizha is able to pull off the upset if he can get those takedowns and secure some control time here, maybe even opening up a finishing opportunity for himself. But like I said, Santos likely the better mixed martial artist here, and that should be enough for him to go out there and pull off the first UFC win of his career. All right, another banger alert on tap here in the flyweight division, as we have Felipe dos Santos coming in at +155, going up against Andrade Lima, who comes in at -180. We'll start off on the Felipe dos Santos side, who picked up a decision victory over Victor Altamirano last time around. It was a very close fight. Probably one that you could have scored in Altamirano's side, and it was Altamirano looking for takedowns early and often in that matchup, obviously winning the first round. Second round was a toss-up. Altamirano managed to land some takedowns, but dos Santos got a good few spots and shots off in his own, which possibly is why the two judges ended up scoring that round in his favor. And then the third round was clearly in dos Santos' favor, as he was getting some good control time, some dominant positions, a submission attempt, and landing some big shots against Altamirano, who's clearly slowing down. We obviously have to take into consideration the altitude as that fight took place in Mexico City, and what kind of issues that could have provided Altamirano with the type of style that he was looking to implement there. But that does not take away from dos Santos rallying back in that third round and having a strong showing there to secure that win, whether he deserved it or not. What really put dos Santos on a lot of people's maps was his short notice UFC debut, where he stepped in against Manel Kape and put on a valiant effort, I believe winning that third round, but ultimately not having enough in the tank to actually get his hand raised. He is an aggressive striker, but also has an aggressive BJJ game, which he's been able to pull off a couple of submissions with. He's an aggressive fighter, a little bit lanky for the division, likes to utilize that range, utilizing combinations and kicks, but he loves to push the pressure as well and stay in his opponent's face. Training out of the same camp as Charles Oliveira, you can see shades of that Oliveira in him, but he still needs a lot more experience if he hopes to eventually fight for the UFC title one day. He's only 23 years old, and that's something to keep in mind. On the flip side, we got Andrade Lima coming in with an unblemished 9-0 record, coming off of a dominant performance against Mitch Raposo. Now, as a guy that was backing Raposo that night, there's no way that fight should have been a split decision. I have no idea how Dave Torelli saw those first two rounds in Raposo's favor. Sure, it looked like Raposo had octagon control as he was moving forward and putting some pressure on Lima, but it was clear that the leg kicks of Lima and the sharp shots down the pipe were causing Raposo a lot of trouble, hence why Raposo seemed a little bit more gun-shy in the second and third rounds. Lima is a lifelong kickboxer, and you can see it on display with how nasty his leg kicks are and his ability to butcher his opponents when he can get into his groove. I think the spots that he shows some issues in is the defensive grappling, and there have been some moments that I think he's gotten lucky in. Let's talk about the Igor Talon fight from the LFA, where I thought that the momentum was slowly shifting Talon's way until it seemed like Talon had some sort of cardio dump near the ending of that second round, which led to him being finished. Then the Igor Severino fight. I thought Severino Severino was starting to get the momentum in his favor. And even though Lima was working back to his feet repeatedly, I thought Severino was slowly going to chip away at him and eventually start securing those positions even more and eventually either get the finish late or at least win that second and third round until he bit him. And then Andrade Lima comes out on the winning end with a DQ victory there. Again, Lima has slowed down late in fights in the past against guys that look to take grapple-heavy approaches. There was a matchup, I believe the last fight that he won on the regional scene by decision was a fight where he controlled the first 2 rounds with his striking. In the third round, he managed to get a triangle choke locked up in the first minute of that round, but mainly used that to kind of rest and was able to hold on to it for about 4 minutes with no intentions of trying to finish that. And that led to him ending up winning that matchup. Again, he's only 25 years old, so I'm sure he's getting better and he's getting more well-rounded, but I don't think that he's going to be a guy that's going to hold on to that undefeated record for a long time. I think that loss might even come this weekend against Felipe Dos Santos, who should be able to be competitive enough in the striking realm, but the key being mixing it up in the grappling realm with his jiu-jitsu, which I think could cause Lima some problems here. I think we've seen a lot from Dos Santos actually teasing it on his IG as well, that he's going to be looking for a lot of grappling scenarios, looking to expose the back of Lima and try to get a submission there. And I think taking a little bit of a shot on Dos Santos to win by submission at plus 1,300 is not a bad way to go about it, along with his plus 155 money line. I think Dos Santos can be competitive enough in the striking realm, and I don't think Lima can just get free shots on his calf and just assume that Dos Santos is going to allow him to do that. I think Dos Santos will continue to pressure him, mix in takedowns, get back to the striking, rinse and repeat, and hopefully that eventually leads to a submission or even just winning this fight outright on the scorecards. I will lean with the underdog here to hand Andrade Lima the first loss of his professional career. All right, next up, Isaac Dulgarian coming in at an unprecedented minus 3,000 in this featherweight matchup as he takes on Brendan Marotte, who comes in at plus 1,300. I am not going to spend any time on this fight. Dulgarian wins, probably first round, whether it's KO or submission. I am not entirely sure. If we can somehow get the round 1 prop at minus 200 or better, that's probably where I end up laying my money because I think it'll be more than worth it. But often that we see, whenever we see fighters at minus 2,000 or higher, sometimes they don't even release method of victory props, but I'd be surprised if they try to even release other props for this matchup. As of right now, there are only method of victory props. Again, I don't feel too confident on either a KO or submission. It seems like I believe the majority of love is on the KO, which is at minus 175. But I do think this finishes early. I don't think Marotte has any chance in this matchup. Shout out to him for even accepting this fight to begin with. But I do think Dulgarian runs through him pretty easily and rebounds from that split decision loss to Christian Rodriguez. All right, moving on to the light heavyweight division, we got Ryan Spann coming in at minus 310, going up against Ovince St. Preux coming in at plus 260. Now, we'll start off on the Ryan Spann side of things, who's on the longest losing streak of his professional career thus far, losing 3 straight, most recently losing to Bogdan Guskov in a matchup where it seems like his fight IQ failed him once again. He utilized a grapple-heavy approach early in that matchup, and even though he got some dominant positions, he was unable to secure the finish, and it seemed like it hindered his performance in the second round, causing him to be a little bit more predictable, his shots not coming as fast or as powerful, and Guskov was able to counter him and eventually put him away with a big shot and get that ground and pound victory. Ryan Spann is a guy that normally likes to go out there and finish his opponents quickly. Otherwise, it's harder for him to be effective against decent competition in deep water. He's actually 5-5 in fights that have reached the second round. More often than not, guys are able to take that momentum from him late and come out on top. In the Anthony Smith fight, the rematch that they had, that was a matchup where I believe Smith won the first round. Spann hurt Smith very badly, and I believe even probably broke his orbital bone, if I'm not mistaken, as well. But he still was unable to take that momentum in the third round, allowing Anthony Smith to chip away at it and end up getting the scorecards in his favor. Ryan Spann powerful early finisher, but I don't think he has anything else to offer outside of that. He's going up against a very tenured veteran in Ovince St. Preux, 41 years old, coming into his 45th professional fight. It's not been the greatest run for him either. In the last 6.5 years, he's accrued a 5-7 record, most recently coming off of a split decision over Kennedy and Nzechukwu, a fight that I thought he won pretty easily. He utilized a lot of movement, stance switches, kicks up the middle, straight shots down the pipe, but a steady amount of volume, which allowed him to get that victory. And I think that's where we see Ovince St. Preux really shine, is when he can get into his groove, switching stances as often as he does, utilizing the straight shots down the pipe and his kicks from distance. If his durability holds up, he's very difficult to deal with, even at 41 years old. We know a 40-year-old at light heavyweight and heavyweight is much more effective than a 40-year-old at lightweight or welterweight, which is why we can give a little bit more rope to guys hitting their 40s at these higher weight classes. Now, I think in this matchup against Ryan Spann, it's just too hard to trust Ryan Spann at minus 310. This is crazy. We've seen him fumble the bag consistently, and how you can be confident on him once again as such a big favorite is going to be, mystifying to me. Say what you want about Ovince St. Preux's durability. Rather than taking Ryan Spann minus 310, honing in on his round 1 KO prop at anything better than plus 100 is the better way to go about it. But with that said, I think Ovince St. Preux is worth a bit of a shot here. I think we've seen him face power punches in the past, and when his chin is showing up, he puts on a pretty crafty performance just like he did against Alonzo Menefield. If he can survive the early shots here, utilize his footwork, get Ryan Spann swinging at air and start chipping away at his gas tank, we could see him put on a performance similar to what he did against Kennedy and Nzechukwu, or maybe even getting that knockout like he did against Alonzo Menefield. I do lean the same Preux side here. I think he is the technically slicker striker. He may not be the more powerful striker, and that's obviously the risk here in taking a plus 260 underdog, but I think that Ovince St. Preux has the veteran experience to make this a favorable fight for him. Again, that first round will be an uphill battle, and taking that hedge spot on Spann round 1 KO is not a bad way to go about it, but I think taking a little bit of a risk here on Ovince St. Preux, not a bad way either. So I'm going to go St. Preux, maybe even sprinkle his decision prop at plus 600. I'm sure FanDuel will probably open it at a better number. As of right now, BetOnline has it at plus 600, but I do like St. Preux here, and I'm going to take St. Preux by decision. All right, lightweight matchup here as we have the returning Rongzhu coming in at minus 235, going up against Chris Padilla coming in at plus 200. We'll start off on the Rongzhu side of things, who actually went 1-2 in his initial run with the UFC, but unfortunately 2 straight weight misses was enough reasoning for the UFC to cut him after he ended up losing to Ignacio Bahamondes. He picked up a big knockout victory on the regional scene for UAE Warriors, and the UFC decided to invite him into the road to UFC, which he ended up finishing 2 of his opponents, most recently Shin Haraguchi, in a matchup where he showcased improved takedown defense, get-ups, and a submission game as he was able to get the rear naked choke in the 3rd round of that matchup. I believe that we're seeing a much better and more mature version of Rongzhu now at 24 years old and 30 fights of experience under his belt. I think we're going to start seeing the best version of him moving forward. He is a dangerous striker who packs a lot of power in his shots, but his problem in the past is that he's been unable to keep fights in the striking realm as opponents have been able to out-grapple him. But like we've been seeing recently, he is getting much, much better at that. And in this matchup against Padilla, it will be very important for him to keep this fight in the upright position, as Padilla is likely the better jiu-jitsu player, and he could have some wrestling success. But if he's unable to, I think Rongzhu can dictate the striking pace of this matchup. Padilla is a power puncher and was a guy that I really didn't think was going to make it to the UFC, but a 3-fight winning streak, including a victory over former UFC fighter Justin James, allowed for him to get that short notice opportunity against James Lawntop and pull off a big upset as a plus 300 underdog to stamp his arrival to the big show. He utilized a lot of takedowns, and eventually the last takedown allowed him to get the back of his opponent and sink in the rear naked choke to get the tap. But I do think that Rongzhu is the better striker, and with his improved takedown defense and get-ups, he should be able to nullify that game from Padilla and end up finding the finish here in his own right. So I'm going to go Rongzhu here, and I think he eventually finds the finish within possibly 2 rounds or so. All right, lightweight banger on tap. between Trevor Peek coming in at -130 going up against Ashmouz coming in at +110. Starting off on the Trevor Peek side of things, he's coming off of a decision loss to Charlie Campbell in a matchup where Campbell was able to outstrike him and outgrapple him, showcasing that Trevor Peek can have some success against decent opponents, but if guys are at a technical advantage over him in both striking and grappling, it's going to be hard for him to overcome that gap. It's his durability and his grittiness that always makes him tough to deal with because he's hard to put away. He's never been finished, and even when it looks like you're about to finish him on the feet, he finds a way to survive those scenarios and get back to his game, which is just being aggressive, pushing the pace, and trying to knock his opponents out. We've seen steady improvements in his grappling game as well, which has gotten him out of some sticky situations. And if it can continue showing that type of defense in those bad spots, this is going to be a very difficult guy to deal with because the only way to really contain him is try to keep him on the mat. On the feet, he's always going to be moving forward and he's always going to be looking to take your head off. These experiences that he's accruing over these last 4 fights are going to be very important for him if he hopes to continue to climb the UFC ranks. And he's going to have to try again this weekend against Ashmouz, who's coming off of his first professional loss to Chris Duncan. That was a matchup, I believe, last July 2023, where he broke his arm in the first round and still managed to go to the scorecards, but was unable to utilize his tools as he was hoping, which ended up seeing him lose the fight on the scorecards to a better technical performance from Chris Duncan. Ashmouz was originally a guy that liked to mainly headhunt against his opponents and look to get him out that way, but has started to rely on some grappling to try to wear his opponents out and finish them from that top position. He trains out of the same gym that Khabib actually started with when he moved stateside to New Jersey, and I wonder if Ashmouz is going to be able to get that good luck that those guys were able to rub off on the Dagestani fighters. Ashmouz looks like a decent fighter, but I still have my question marks about his ability to cemented against guys that are going to consistently provide resistance. And that's what he's going to get here in Trevor Peek. So I kind of understand why Peek is a slight favorite in this matchup. Ashmouz might be the better technical fighter, but I just don't know if he can keep it in this fight in a spot where he'll be able to accrue enough damage or at least enough success to win it on the scorecards. Because there's no way he's finishing Trevor Peek, right? I know Ashmouz hits like a goddamn Mack truck, just like ask Sam Patterson, who was out for what seemed like an eternity, but Peek has eaten some insane shots in the past and still managed to walk forward and through those shots of his opponents. So I'm thinking that there will eventually be a circumstance where Ashmouz says fucking throws down in the pocket against Peek, and that's going to cause some problems for him as Peek will respond willingly and probably even land a big shot of his own to put Ashmouz out. I'm going to lean Peek here, Peek by knockout, but I'd rather sit back and watch this on the sidelines and try to dictate or at least try to predict how I would bet these guys moving forward. This will tell us a lot about both guys. This will tell us Trevor Peek's ceiling, and this will show us Ashmouz's ceiling as well. I'm going to go Peek and Peek by knockout, but this should definitely be a very, very fun fight. All right, next up, Steve Garcia coming in at -180 in this featherweight matchup going up against Kyle Nelson, who comes in at +155. Now, Steve Garcia has been on an absolute Cinderella run over the last couple of fights, similar to his opponent. But with Steve Garcia, he's on a 4-fight winning streak, finishing all 4 of those opponents by knockout. He has tried to implement some other types of approaches, just like he tried doing against Sung Woo Choi. He tried going for takedowns, but was unsuccessful in doing so. And then when he finally managed to get Sung Woo Choi to engage in a war with him, he was able to land his big patent and power and get Choi out of there. There have been other fighters who have had some grappling success against him, but once the fight starts in the second round and they're forced to strike with Garcia again, they end up meeting the big power of him and end up falling up short. Garcia has a decent all-around game, but I think it's really his power that makes him such a threat to most opponents. He could end up looking like a Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis type fighter, where most fighters will have major success against him until they end up meeting that big shot and get knocked out. And that's my issue in terms of betting Steve Garcia fights. I don't want to bet a fighter like that at chalk like he is this weekend. I would rather back him as an underdog, hoping that he can get the knockout. But rather than taking his money line, knockout is probably the best way to go for him, or at least taking the under 1.5. That might be the approach that I decide to take here, as Kyle Nelson is on a roll of his own and has big enough power to potentially contend with Garcia should they throw down in the pocket. Nelson was actually on the chopping block early last year until he was able to go to a draw with Doo Ho Choi, which saved him for a 3-fight losing streak, and then extended his UFC career. And now he's managed to pull off 3 straight victories, all fights that he found himself as the underdog in. He's utilizing a little bit more of a patient striking approach, mixing and clinching here and there, utilizing leg kicks to fill the gaps, and then letting go with his power combinations when he sees the openings. We saw it eventually pay off for him in a knockout against Bill Algeo last time around, as he cashed as a plus 200, I believe, underdog, and actually handed Bill Algeo the first knockout loss of his professional career. I got to be honest, coming into the UFC, I did not think Kyle Nelson was long for that UFC roster, but credit to him, he's been able to make the improvements, utilize the experience that he's been garnering, and try to make the most of it and being as successful as he has. Now, this matchup is a fight that I could see go either way, especially if this comes down to just being a gun-slinging matchup with both these guys throwing bombs in the pocket. I do have to lean with Steve Garcia, as he is a little bit more awkward and unorthodox from the angles in which that he throws, and that could potentially cause Kyle Nelson some problems. But in doing that, that also leaves openings for Nelson's to find those counter shots with those slicker shots down the pipe that could cause Garcia problems as well. The under 1.5 is where I will put my money here. Garcia is a guy that loves to finish fights inside the distance. That prop has hit in the last 6 fights for Garcia, as well as his last 8 wins. And I think that he's going to force Kyle Nelson into a war here, which will eventually end up in a knockout. I'm going to go Garcia by first round knockout. Nelson, round 1 KO at plus, I could be wrong here, but I thought I saw it at plus 800. Not a bad way to go about it either. I could be wrong about that. I might be getting mixed up with something else. But both of these guys capable of finishing this fight in the first round. Fight to not start round 2 might be a good way to go about it as well. But I will eat the chalk on the under 1.5 and expect Garcia to end up getting his hand raised. All right. Co-main event time. Women's flyweights going at it here, as we have former champion of the strawweight division, Jessica Andrade, and former flyweight title challenger, Jessica Andrade, coming in at plus 240, going up against Natalia Silva, who comes in at plus 180. I believe, we'll start off on the Jessica Andrade side, who's on a 2-fight winning streak. Both of those wins coming up at 125 pounds, but she's showing off her versatility. Yeah, she's still able to go out there and be competitive at strawweight if she needs to. Sorry, the last 2 wins coming at strawweight, and now this fight taking place at flyweight. She's been able to jump between those weight classes without too much issue. I believe she prefers strawweight more often than not, but given the opportunity that she's getting here in the co-main event slot against a fighter that is knocking on the door of title contendership, I'm sure Andrade would want to take that steam from Silva and try to position herself in a title contender matchup next time as well. Andrade against Mackenzie Dern was able to stop the takedowns and then eventually find that knockout blow after hurting Dern numerous times in that matchup. And then in the Marina Rodriguez fight, that was a close fight. That was a fight that I thought, I believe Andrade won the first round. She won the first round after Rodriguez slipped, and Andrade ended up enjoying the rest of the first round on top of her. In the second round, it seemed like Rodriguez was winning the majority of that round until the last minute when Andrade just started to bull rush her, and she landed some big shots, and that was enough to sway the judges in her favor. And then in the third round, I thought Rodriguez did a good enough job in terms of sticking and moving and causing Andrade a lot of problems. And that's the issues that Andrade has faced in the past before. Either very good grapplers like Erin Blanchfield and Tatiana Suarez, who were able to, and Valentina Shevchenko, who were able to just keep her on her back and either finish her or submit her, or slicker strikers who have been able to stick and move and cause Jessica Andrade to swing at air, just as we saw in that final round against Rodriguez and for the first 4 minutes of that second round. She's still only 32, which is wild considering that this is going to be her 39th professional MMA fight, and it seems like she's fought everybody that the women's strawweight and flyweight division has to offer for her, except Natalia Silva, who she faces this weekend. Power puncher, decent wrestling if she can implement it against her opponents, but it's really her ability to stay in her opponent's face and crash the pocket repeatedly with big power shots that has made her so effective throughout her career. Her opponent this weekend, Natalia Silva, rides, I believe, a 10-fight winning streak, most recently picking up a unanimous decision victory over Viviane Araújo. That was a matchup where she struggled to get away from Rongzhu in the first round. Rongzhu pretty much pushing her up against the cage, landing some knees, not really being successful with any takedowns. And then in the second and third rounds, we saw Silva a little bit better in terms of disengaging and then getting to her striking, which was causing Rongzhu a lot of issues. Silva is one of the best in terms of moving laterally and utilizing shots straight down the pipe to cause her opponents a ton of issues. It's led to her getting a few finishes against Teresa Bleda and Victoria Leonardo. But if we continue to see those defensive grappling improvements from her, she's going to be very difficult to deal with. She's still only 27 years old. She's growing at an exponential rate. She's very active off of her back if she is taken down, throwing up submissions, looking for reversals, getting back to her feet. But where she is best is when she can operate with her striking, walking her opponents into her striking. I'm usually not a fan of fighters that constantly move backwards, but she plants her feet often enough and throws and lands with such significance that I don't mind it because it's so effective for her. Now, in this matchup, that's what she's going to be doing against Andrade. I'd kind of be surprised if Andrade has enough success looking to take Silva down. I think Silva is active enough off of her back that she could even catch Jessica Andrade in a submission of some sort. But I think the majority of this matchup ends up taking place in the striking realm, where Silva does what Marina Rodriguez, but even more effectively and possibly even more deadly in the fact that Silva could potentially land a big enough shot to put Andrade out. And I get it. Andrade, very tough, very durable, but she has been knocked out by Yan Xiaonan, who's not, a huge power puncher, at least in terms of what her record says. Silva, in my opinion, a little bit better of a technical striker than Yan, at least in terms of landing shots straight down the pipe, timing them very well, and being very accurate. And I think that could pay off for her here against Jessica Andrade. It's always tough to fade Andrade with heavy chalk, but I think that this fight plays perfectly into Silva's favor, and it could even result in a knockout victory for her. So my official prediction will be Silva by decision, but I might sprinkle a little bit on that Silva KO prop if it's anything better than plus 400. But I'm going to go Silva, and I think she knocks on the door of a potential title shot with a victory here. All right. Main event time. Welterweights going at it here as we have 38-year-old Gilbert Burns coming in at plus 160, going up against 16-1, 31-year-old Sean Brady coming in at minus 185. Now, Gilbert Burns currently finds himself on a 2-fight losing streak. The last one, probably the hardest of them to swallow, considering that he was about a minute and a half away from getting his hand raised. He was up 2-0 on two judges' scorecards, but he ended up gassing out, and Jack Della Maddalena forced him to work enough that he was able to muster up a finish and cause the referee to step in. Now, if you guys read my breakdown or watched back my breakdown for that matchup, I believe I called it to a T in that fight. I expected Burns to have some grappling success early, but I knew we would see Maddalena survive those attempts, and then Maddalena would put on a pressure and pace that Burns was not going to be able to keep up with, and it came down to the wire there, but Maddalena was able to end up getting the finish late in that matchup and prove my breakdown and analysis of that fight correct. In my opinion, I think Gilbert Burns has been a little bit overrated throughout his career. Sure, he is much better than what he was when he first came to the UFC. He's gotten much better at striking, mainly coming in as a jiu-jitsu player, but the work he's been doing at Killcliff FC under Henry Hoof, it's clearly working out for him. He has good striking, unless he's fighting a much better striker. That's when he starts going to his wrestling, just as we saw against Jack Della Maddalena, just as we saw against Jorge Masvidal, just as we saw against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. That's why he ends up desperation grappling against those guys, because he's not able to strike with those guys. And I don't blame him. It's mixed martial arts at the end of the day, so utilize your advantage as best as you can. In this matchup against Sean Brady, he's probably the better striker. But the question is he going to be able to maintain distance and maintain the space that he needs to get off on those strikes? I think he might want to play guard a little bit here against Brady to try to prove a point that he could be the better jiu-jitsu player. But I think that Brady is going to be very tough to submit. And sure, people might try to lean on the fact that Brady gassed out against Bilal Muhammad, but seeing what Bilal was able to do against Leon Edwards, and now just putting Bilal's career into perspective, that guy is a pace machine. The guy is a cardio machine. He puts on a high pace, high pressure, causing guys to gas out, and then he's able to take over against them late. And I think that's where Brady ended up having the issues. I think Brady can kind of dictate the pace of this matchup. It will be competitive early, but as he starts wearing on Burns and slowing him down, I think he opens up finishing opportunities for himself. I think we see Brady break down Burns, utilizing his wrestling, utilizing his power striking, but mainly in the clinch, dragging this fight to the ground, and just utilizing his wrestling advantage to keep Burns on his back, utilizing his BJJ black belt to stay out of submissions of Burns, and then wearing him down, breaking him, and eventually finishing him maybe in the third or fourth round. I like Brady in the spot. The only thing that would make me even more comfortable was if this was a 3-round fight. But considering that is the first time Brady will go 5 rounds in the UFC against somebody of the level of Burns, it gives me just a little bit of hesitation, but still not enough for me to not go out there and take a shot on Brady here and even sprinkle that inside the distance, round 3, round 4 prop as well. So I'm going to go Brady here. I just think he's at this stage of his career much better than Burns at 38. And if he can avoid an early finishing shot here from Burns, he should be able to dictate the pace and eventually get the finish, like I said, in the 3rd or 4th round. There you guys go. Breakdowns for UFC Vegas 97. Reminder, I will break down the Matt Schnell and Cody Durden fight for you guys tomorrow afternoon, so stay tuned for that. Check out the YouTube page for that. Thursday, I will drop the Bellator breakdowns, so stay tuned for that. Octagon 60 and Cage Warriors will only be in written form on the MMALOTN Patreon page. Check the link in the description below for that. Otherwise, I will see you guys again tomorrow for that aforementioned Durden and Schnell breakdown, as well as my top 3 lock of the night and top 3 dog of the night segments. See you guys then. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. Peace.